Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. I'm Borys Tizengauzen. Today is September 26th and we have a very eventful episode. In this episode, drones are once again attacking Russian oil refineries. Trump made a high-profile statement about Russia, but NATO has warned the Kremlin. The next incursion by Russian aircraft will be the last. So who is actually launching these unidentified drones over Denmark, Sweden and Norway? And most importantly, where do they disappear to afterwards? And also about how Jong Un will soon acquire nuclear weapons capable of reaching the United States. And about how the US Secretary of Defense is convening an urgent meeting of American generals from all over the world. We'll talk about all this in today's episode. If you're new to this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And as usual, we begin with Modiar's sanctions. Last night, drones once again attacked the Afipsky oil refinery, which is located in the Krasnodar region. Now I'll show you a video where some Russian gentleman tries to express his mixed feelings using some strong language. Take a look. Local authorities confirmed the attack, stating that debris fell on one of the units and of course the fire has been extinguished. Basically, as always, they shot down the drones with the entire refinery. And now the traditional life hack for Russian corrupt officials. Take note, you sell fuel from the oil depot, then set the oil depot on fire. Then you claim that drones or debris flew in and destroyed everything. After that, you'll get a certificate of appreciation from the SBU. I'll tell you where to pick it up. And Trump has made a number of rather serious and harsh statements. In other words, Putin must stop. I want Erdogan to stop buying oil from Russia while Russia continues its aggression against Ukraine. This is what Trump said during his meeting with Erdogan. I want Erdogan to stop buying and I want Putin to stop as well. Look, Putin will stop only where he is stopped. Fascist thugs from the back alleys only understand the language of force. I think the whole world has already seen this. And another statement from Trump, Russia's economy is heading into the abyss. They, the Russians, are bombing everything indiscriminately. But they're capturing very little territory, if they're capturing any at all. In fact, they're even losing some territories, said Donald Trump. So, in other words, there is some clarity in his words. How long it will last, we don't know yet. And one more point. How could we do without it? How could we do without this point? This war should have already ended if it were our war. We would have finished it in just 1 week. Just yesterday in my broadcast, I used the wars in Vietnam and Afghanistan as examples. Both lasted 20 years, and somehow no one managed to end them with anything. That's normal. And in addition, Trump stated that Putin kills people for no reason at all. Yes, that's been clear to everyone for a long time. Now, regarding the claim that this isn't our war, when Trump says that we would have already finished it, actually he used to say that it wouldn't have even started if he had been president. Now he says that we would have ended it easily. Well, yeah, if this were actually our war. So most likely he meant that the American army would be involved there and so on. But honestly, I'm not doubting the strength and power of the American army, but maybe you could end this war with a snap of your fingers. Come on, seriously. So what's the next level going to be? If this were our war, would Ukraine have defeated everyone there, or how would that go? The war would have ended a long time ago if truly tough sanctions had been imposed. On the one hand, Trump says he's killing innocent people. According to Donald Trump, over 1,000 people die every day in Ukraine. But you're letting him do it. By the way, about sanctions, no one is even talking about the threat of an ultimatum anymore. As for the statement of fact, Putin is killing people for no reason at all. Yes, it's a very, very typical picture. So some aggressor attacks people on the street, a crowd gathers around and they just stand there and comment, look, he's pulled out a knife, he's about to stab him, how awful. And the crowd just stands around and comments on it. They don't intervene. Well, I'll say it again, that brilliant phrase by Einstein about how evil exists not because it simply exists, but because there are those who turn a blind eye to it. And also about what happens if you don't stop the balding thug in time. Not to wait like I want Putin to stop, but rather something needs to hit his cockpit so hard that all his sacred values go flying. What happens if you don't stop him? In Denmark, the airport was closed again at night for the third time because of drone threats. In other words, it's already creeping over there. Everything is spreading into Europe now. Some flights were delayed, others were redirected. Let me remind you, earlier drones were spotted over airports and military facilities in Sweden and Norway. And I'll also remind you that 24 specifically Russian drones flew into Poland. And Russian fighter jets violated the airspace of NATO countries. So all of this is happening right now. And by the way, unidentified drones were also spotted in France. There, apparently, they were quadcopters, although now people are already being overly cautious. There you have it. Well, look at what's happening with these drones. It's an amazing story. With the drones in Denmark, Russia called the repeated drone flights into Denmark a staged provocation. I quote the Russian embassy in Denmark, "Undoubtedly, this provocation will be used as a pretext for further escalation of tensions in the interests of those forces who are doing everything possible to prolong the Ukrainian conflict as much as possible." The Russian side categorically rejects any speculation and involvement in the incidents. And now, let's take a look at what really happened there. Well, as they say, the guilty one always gives himself away. Someone, I'm not sure who, maybe in other countries, feels the need to justify why drones are flying over the airport in Denmark. And these guys showed up. It wasn't us. No one even asked them yet. It wasn't us. They know they'll be the first to be blamed. I don't know, did the Indian or Kazakh embassy come out and say we reject the accusations? Of course not, because everyone always immediately suspects the most vile scoundrel, which right now is the Russian Federation and its leaders. Now, regarding the situation with these drones, I admit that some of the sabotage was carried out, let's say, by outside individuals. In other words, someone was asked through Telegram or paid in crypto, money was sent, and they were asked, say, take a drone, launch it, let it fly around, or just press a button. It'll fly on its own from there. I do allow for the possibility that such provocations are possible, but this is a different story. Here, eyewitnesses say that the drones were quite large. So then where do they disappear to? Why can't they be shot down? There is actually an explanation for this. They were possibly launched from a sea platform, so it flies over the sea, keeps going, then appears over land and near the closest airport. That's why it's not seen from the land, that's why it isn't shot down, because it was coming from the sea the whole time. It was launched from a sea platform. In Denmark, there's now a theory that several tankers from the Russian Shadow Fleet may be involved in launching these drones. And here's what else journalists have discovered. These journalists made the discovery while flying in a rented helicopter, and look what they found. A Russian Federation warship was spotted in the waters near Denmark. At the very same time, these drones were circling above the country's airport and military facilities. The large landing ship named Alexander Shabalin, which is permanently based in the strategically important Kaliningrad region, had for the past several days been positioned just 12 kilometers from the Danish coast. Its automatic identification system, or AIS, transponder was deliberately turned off so no one could visually track its movements. Of course, it's a military landing ship designed for covert operations. In short, it mysteriously stayed there for several days, somehow managing to remain undetected and unobserved. Then, when journalists spotted it from a helicopter, it set off in an unknown direction. And notably, the Danish armed forces were aware that a Russian military ship was off the coast of Langeland Island. But so far, they have not commented on the situation. And now, the main theory is that drones were being launched from this ship, or reconnaissance was being carried out to see how and where they fly. And they were being launched from platforms in the form of tankers from this Russian Shadow Fleet. So seriously, friends, you should ask Ukraine for help in this regard. If you don't know how to catch drones, if you don't know how to shoot them down, Ukraine will always help its allies. Either in exchange for long-range missiles, which would really help us out, and you too, by the way. I'll keep repeating this in every episode. Long-range missiles are the key to making sure drones don't reach you. With these missiles, Ukraine will wipe out all the drone production plants. And Ukraine will gladly show you what can be done with Russian ships, and where exactly they should be headed. On which route actually is not to an unknown destination. They have a very specific route. Let me remind you that a third of the Black Sea Fleet, including its flagship, the cruiser Moskva, is lying on the bottom of the Black Sea. The remaining part fled to Novorossiysk. By the way, yesterday, unmanned boats arrived there and caused quite a stir. So Ukraine is chasing the remnants of the Black Sea Fleet around like ragged ships. And also, since we're talking about Denmark, there's something really good that can be done. Something truly important. To effectively close the strategically important Danish straits to the notorious Russian Shadow Fleet. All those numerous tankers, heavily laden and carrying their sanctioned oil from the port of Ust-Luga, are currently passing through the Danish straits, much like navigating through a very narrow and constricted bottleneck. They could quite simply be blocked there, or indeed not allowed through at all. That's when Russia would really start having very serious problems. Let me remind you, friends, we are currently running an important fundraiser for our warriors, our defenders, for the legendary 3rd Assault Brigade. The commanders have recorded this message for us. Please listen.
Greetings, friends. My call sign is Talbat. I am the commander of the Popstar Crew, 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, Strike Company, and in the unit. I am addressing the viewers of Borys Tizengauzen's channel, asking for donations for Matrice 30 drones.
These are great copters, and we need them for reconnaissance. They also perform some other very interesting functions for intelligence gathering. 1,100,000 hryvnias. We are counting on your support, on your help. Thanks to them, we will be able to destroy the enemy even more effectively and bring Ukraine's victory closer.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
Let's help our defenders. And let me at least remind you that drones in the hands of the warriors from the 3rd Assault Brigade are a terrifying weapon for the occupiers who have come to our land. Right now they've started another attempt at an offensive, so our help, yours and mine, will be more timely than ever. The link to donate is in the description of this video. The link to donate is also in the comments. There's Privat, there's Mono, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. I see everyone, and I want to say a huge thank you to all of you. You are simply the best. And if you don't see the payment details, maybe you're watching on a different channel, the QR code right here will take you directly to the fundraiser. Let's help our people. NATO once again had to scramble military aircraft to intercept Russian fighter jets near the borders of Latvia. 5 Russian military aircraft were spotted there this time. Last time, 3 MiG-31s violated Estonian airspace. This time there are already 5, 3 MiGs, 1 Su-30 and 1 Su-35. In general, according to NATO, they were violating international flight safety regulations. Hungarian fighter jets were scrambled for the interception. And there's also important information, as Bloomberg is reliably reporting, that the Russian government officials were given a very specific and stern warning not to undertake this kind of action again in the future. Bloomberg, citing sources, reports that this week European diplomats gave the Kremlin a stern warning and that NATO is prepared to respond to further violations of its airspace, including by shooting down a Russian aircraft. In other words, they are reporting on a tense meeting in Moscow, which was held by representatives from Britain, France, and Germany with one of the Russian diplomats. So, according to their version, in response, the Russian diplomat made it clear that these violations of NATO countries' airspace were a response to Ukrainian attacks on Crimea. He stated that these operations would have been impossible without NATO's support. I would just like to remind you that previously the Russians claimed that their aircraft had not violated NATO airspace. So it turns out they did violate it after all, and this is their retaliation for the attacks on Crimea. And let me also remind you that Crimea has been attacked many times, the bridge was blown up, and the Black Sea Fleet was driven out of Crimea. And the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet in my hometown of Sevastopol was destroyed by missiles. I've never seen a better sight in my life. So why didn't Russian planes retaliate back then, but now they've suddenly decided to take revenge? By the way, in what way has NATO recently participated in the attacks? Reconnaissance? Yes, possibly, but they always do that. They conduct reconnaissance. By the way, let me just remind you that this week, the special unit of the GUR Primaries Ghosts carried out 3 successful attacks on Russian aviation and radar stations. They destroyed 4 Mi-8 helicopters, 2 BE-12 amphibious aircraft, and 2 AN-26 military transport planes. Excellent work. They also destroyed several more radar stations, including coastal ones. They blinded them a little. Now it will be harder to see with just one eye what's flying toward you. Special thanks to the GUR Promara unit for cleansing my native Crimea of filth. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. People who are truly in the know often say that a calm and thorough analysis genuinely helps to keep your canteens from whistling loudly at the most inconvenient and unexpected moment. So, as they frequently say, please do subscribe and the Cuckoo Ensemble will certainly not go on an unplanned or unforeseen trip. A little bit of calm never hurts. Now, a bit about the good guys, as Donald Trump calls them, or rather, about the good guy Kim Jong Un. North Korea is in the final stages of developing an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of striking the United States. This was stated by South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. Well, while some people were busy deciding who to make deals with or where to buy rare earth elements, the club of dictators formed a kind of mutual support circle, actively helping each other. Soon, the entire club of dictators will be nuclear, without exception. China, Russia, North Korea, there you go. Iran is now finishing its bombs somewhere in bunkers underground. And as for Lukashenko, he's already received a couple of warheads from Putin, as they say. That's it, the whole club of dictators is complete. Now all that's left is to set up Maduro in Venezuela, send some Iskanders over there, and everything will be just great. Yes, as they say, that's it. And by the way, Lukashenko and Putin are now hobnobbing at the Global Nuclear Forum in Russia, and just a second. So, it's been a while since I showed Siegfried. Here he is, trying to open the door with his foot. Well, when the leather one isn't serving, you have to do everything yourself, as they say. So, Lukashenko and Putin are hobnobbing at the Global Nuclear Forum in Russia, and Lukashenko thanked Putin there for making Belarus, and I quote, a true nuclear power. Well, that's it, everything I've been saying. Now they're all nuclear dictators and little dictators. Also, Lukashenko said that the hazel tree is already on its way to him. I don't know about the hazel tree, whatever that means, but his mind is definitely going off the rails. You can see it from time to time. He's been making some pretty wild statements lately. And by the way, at that same nuclear forum is the head of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi. By the way, Mr. Grossi is one of the candidates for the new UN Secretary General to replace Guterres. What's that about? Every UN Secretary General has to nicely attend events with Putin, shake his hand, and bow to him. By the way, I just realized I haven't heard anything about Guterres in a while. Where is he? Oh, here he is. Look, here's a photo. Lavrov and the UN Secretary General are smiling, holding hands. This photo, it's a verdict on the United Nations as an organization. I also remember how Guterres attended the BRICS summit in Kazan, happily shook Putin's paw, even bowed a little like this. And at the Kazan airport he was eating tatar chak-chak, enjoying the sweets, everything tasted so good to him. Meanwhile, at that very moment, Putin was killing peaceful Ukrainian civilians. Well, the Organization of Concerned Nations should be disbanded. That is, I think it should at least be seriously reformed. And by the way, people are already openly talking about this. Finally, the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, has called for UN reforms. No country should have the right to veto in the UN. A member of the UN Security Council should lose its voting rights if it violates the UN Charter. Hallelujah. The president of Finland is absolutely right. This Guterres club, it's time to shut it down. Long overdue. At one time, the Soviet Union was expelled from the League of Nations because it attacked Finland in that very winter war. After that, instead of the League of Nations, because it proved its lack of purpose and capability, the United Nations was created. And 5 countries were granted the right of veto. That is, this happened right after World War II. Why on earth do these countries still have the right of veto now? Simply because at that time they were considered the main victors in the war, the USA, the UK, France, the USSR, and China. And by the way, the USSR was granted both a seat and the right of veto, so what does Russia have to do with it? What does successor state even mean? So the right of veto means that even if everyone wants to pass a resolution, if one country votes against it, that's it. Such an organization has shown neither the idea nor the capability. The UN was originally created as an alliance of victors, a group of privileged ones, those who had the right of veto. Well, the logic is very simple. The League of Nations outlived its usefulness and was dissolved. The UN was created in its place. Now the UN has proven that it can't do anything, it can't stop this war, it can't influence the aggressor. That's it. This war, just like that photo, is also a verdict on the United Nations. By the way, Lavrov claims that it wasn't Russia that attacked Ukraine, but rather that NATO and the European Union, using Ukraine, attacked Russia. NATO and the EU, through Ukraine, have declared war on Russia and are directly participating in it. Lavrov stated this: well, everything is stable in the world. Once again, they're whining about NATO's involvement. They forgot, so let me just remind you of the chronology. Putin, with a smug face, appeared early in the morning and announced the start of this so-called special military operation. There wasn't a single word about NATO. He supposedly came to denazify and demilitarize. By the way, they've already forgotten those words themselves. Half of them couldn't even pronounce it, and the other half have forgotten it. So they decided to come with that goal in mind. No one said a word about NATO. I vividly remember that very first day of the war quite well. I got back home from the television studio at around midnight, from the Ukraine 24 talk show, and then at 5 a.m., all of Ukraine suddenly woke up to loud explosions. I go into our work chat, and there it says, "Guys, are you aware that the war has started?" By the way, that's the last message in that chat. No one ever wrote anything there again. And yes, the 1.5 meter tall ghoul came out, banging his little hand saying, "I'm starting a special military operation." At that time, our military and law enforcement officers started receiving mass messages urging them to surrender. The messages said that the Russians would be here soon. They promised some kind of reward for cooperation. That's when a significant number of traitors recruited by the Russians were exposed. In general, sabotage and reconnaissance groups started appearing in Kyiv and other cities. The Russians were already landing in Hostomel, those helicopters, I think everyone remembers them. They thought they would really capture Kyiv in just a few days. So everything was very simple there. 300 paratroopers land in Hostomel and hold the airfield. And military transport planes were supposed to land there. It's 25 kilometers from Kyiv. So they were supposed to rush straight into Kyiv and then take the government quarter. Everyone who, in their opinion, needed to be eliminated would be killed, the rest captured and imprisoned. In short, something went wrong. The Ukrainians refused to surrender and showed the whole world how to fight for their freedom. People who had never fought before organized themselves, took up arms, and resisted the Russians. By the way, this is a key difference between Ukrainians and Russians. Remember, when the Ukrainian armed forces entered the Kursk region, there was no resistance at all, none whatsoever. The Russians simply fled their homes, while Ukrainians desperately defended and protected theirs. And in those first days, the occupiers fully experienced all the so-called brotherly love towards them, of course in quotation marks. The Russians had their equipment set on fire, they were poisoned, shot at both at night and during the day. In other words, Ukrainians showed that their partisan past could very well become a partisan present. I remember a video, I actually found it, and you'll see it now, where in one of the towns, Ukrainians in a Zhiguli overtake a Russian APC and throw a Molotov cocktail at it. This is the video. They understood perfectly well that they could be shot at from that APC at any moment. And there were hundreds of such cases. The Russians themselves were shocked later when they were retreating at how fiercely they had been met here. And one more piece of news, this is all to say that now he's going around claiming that NATO or someone else started the war against him, but everyone remembers everything very well. Just because Putin doesn't use the internet doesn't mean that other people in the world are backward. Another piece of news, which I find very alarming, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has ordered hundreds of American generals and admirals from around the world to urgently gather in Virginia next week, without specifying the reason. This was reported by the Washington Post citing a source. Naturally, this has caused some anxiety, and the invitations were sent to military personnel with the rank of brigadier general and above. Moreover, the location is known, the military base in Quantico. In general, no one understands what's going on. The first thing I thought of was, what about security? I mean, just imagine, they want to gather generals and admirals from all over the world at one military base in Quantico in a pretty short time frame, and tell them something there. And right away I thought about the security issue. I mean, somehow it already ended up online. People already know where and when. It's very strange. And there was talk that this might be connected to a reduction in military leadership. Now really seems like the perfect time to downsize as I see it, right on the threshold. And now, our traditional segment. Donald is my friend, but oil is more valuable. Orban emerged from his lair and responded to Trump's statement. Donald Trump, let me remind you, said that he could persuade Budapest to give up Russian oil. But Orban replied that Hungary is a sovereign country and decides for itself what to do. For Orban, Russian oil is a vital resource. Let me remind you, without Russian oil, his regime is finished. I hope we'll see that in next year's elections. In the meantime, the best sanctions are the Modia sanctions. The GUAR and the SBU will dismantle the Druzhba oil pipeline for spare parts. Well, some people who really love it can carry it from Russia by the bucketful. By the way, after these strikes on Russian oil refineries, there's a pretty serious fuel crisis. Gas stations are closing en masse, and there are huge lines for gasoline. Now I'm wondering, can we still call Russia a gas station country? It turns out that some truly remarkable Ukrainian heroes can actually change that entire narrative. And now, for the significant news I specifically saved for the very end of this episode, because it quite literally came out just about 5 minutes before I commenced recording. He has passed away. Sorry, it's hard to speak. This news is just like that. The Russian propagandist Tigran Keosayan has died. This was reported by his wife, Margarita Simonian. Let me remind you that he and his wife did a lot to promote the war and justify it. And when his wife Simonian was crying and saying, "I come to him, I talk to him," he reaches out his hands to me somehow. Well, apparently he's now stretched out his legs as well. I don't know, maybe they'll have a memorial service or ask Putin to wait so they can all be received together, as they say, in bulk, but no one can escape karma. Karma is a bitch, as they say, which translated means karma is a rather unpredictable woman. Well, friends, take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Let's help our heroes and welcome the assault brigades. Let's contribute to this fundraiser. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.